I don't have much for us today. I have what may be our last COVID update for a while. We've been, especially in the beginning of this whole thing, we were doing COVID updates, just kind of describing what our church's response to COVID is going to be. And we were doing those fast and furious, right? And then over time, things got a little bit more predictable. And in that process, we came up with our regathering phase strategy to kind of try as best as we could to lead into a future with a vision of what it would look like to gather again. And then we did. We had these phases. So we're going to start here, and then we're going to reintroduce this when that happens, and so on and so forth until phase 4, which is titled Everything the Way It Should Be. And we feel really blessed to be able to enter into phase 4 of our regathering strategy beginning Easter Sunday. So that's a huge milestone. We're going to be able to set the church into everything the way it should be on Easter Sunday. So what that means practically is a full return of all of the ministry programs that we have been unable to do due to COVID restrictions or volunteer capacity. We will no longer be dependent on video chat for our grace groups or our business meetings. We will be back to everything the way it should be. Now the world around us might not all yet be in stage 4, but because we're such a small church and just the way that the things are working for us, we are able to enter into stage 4. And as far as most of the world around us, as of today, or at least last time I checked, I'll rephrase and say, last time I checked, there were 16 states with absolutely no COVID restrictions. No mask mandates, no COVID restrictions of any kind in 16 states across the country right now. Some of those states, such as Florida, have been in that situation for a very long time. They've spent more months without COVID restrictions than they have spent with them. And whenever you look at their numbers, there's these metrics of like, how safe is it, when you look at their numbers compared to the states where things have been locked up tight, like say California or New York, there's not much of a difference there. And so we got a history of data to show us that locking up tight and restricting versus opening up wide is not much of a difference in its effect, its danger or safety level. And so that's one reason why I'm very comfortable leading our church into phase 4 of our regathering strategy beginning Easter Sunday. But there's more reasons than that that I feel comfortable moving into this phase. One, something to celebrate. Up until this point at least, we haven't had one single person in our church family with a positive COVID test. Amen. Not one single person in our entire church. Now, I know a lot of churches who can't say that same thing. But it's an important point to note because God has told his leaders and his pastors to lead their churches in different ways. So the church down the road might need to lead their church. That pastor might need to lead his church in a very different way than I've been called to lead our church. So maybe there's just some risks, some health and safety risks there that just didn't exist here. And maybe there's some things that we can do that they can't, and there's some things that they can do that we can't. And whatever. I know one church who was closed back in March, whenever it was we all shut down, and they're still not open. They're not even looking at when they will reopen yet. Not in the near future. They've been closed the whole time. I know other churches that never shut down. I know some churches have been outdoors this whole time, regardless of weather. Each pastor leading their church the way he feels led. And so I look back on this metric of nobody here has gotten any COVID positive tests, as an affirmation that we have been doing what God has called us to do. There hasn't been any safety issues as a result of the way God's called us to lead this church. And it is different than some other churches have led, and that's okay. It's a good thing because we're a different church than theirs. So we can celebrate that. But no matter how we would have dealt with COVID, it was going to be unpopular with somebody. And so we knew that going into it too. I'll give you an example. I know a church down the road, they've got an average attendance before COVID of say 500 a week. And the way God told him to lead his church was to do exactly what the government said to do. So whatever the restrictions were, or whenever the restrictions no longer applied to churches and they were just recommendations, he still did exactly what they recommended. and he had members leave the church forever. One group said, "You're taking COVID too seriously." The other group said, "You're not taking COVID seriously enough." So doing exactly what the government recommended, he had people on both sides of the issue leave his church. One because he was taking it too seriously, the other because it wasn't serious enough, right? So he couldn't win. And so I say this because I think every pastor in the country can relate a little bit. But nevertheless, I feel like we've come out of this a lot stronger than we went into it in many ways.
Amen.
By the time we get to Easter, everybody who is in our vulnerable category, who we plan to see again, will be fully immunized and have returned to the gathering. And that's easy for me to know because we're a small church. I got pretty much everybody's phone number in my pie, I know everybody by name. It won't always be that way, but I'm familiar enough to know that everybody will be back, that we can expect to come back. And it's relieving for me to be able to finally plant that flag on phase 4 because we know that online church just isn't a thing. It's just not a thing. And you can ask the people who have been depending on it because they just had no other way to join us. They'll tell you firsthand, that's just not a thing. You can't download fellowship. You're not going to stream church. Church is a community. Church is a fellowship. And that's just not something you can do online. And I'll tell you some math that has been done, some statistics that a recent survey was done to test the memory retention of people who were listening to the same sermon. So everybody listened to the same sermon 3 different ways. Those who listened online only retained about 25% of the message. Those who were present in the congregation listening retained about 45% of the message. And those who were present and did something physically to apply the message retained about 75% of the sermon. So there's a huge difference. I mean, we just know online church just doesn't work. It's not a thing. But for some, it's been all they've had. And we're grateful for the technology to help, kind of band-aid for now. But we as a church are finally able to enter into phase 4, while the rest of the world may have to do a little catch-up around us. And so that's a big victory. And that's, I think, worth a little bit of applause. So, exciting. And that's really my only announcement for today. So that, again, is going to begin Easter Sunday.